So last month, I was just scrolling through Goodreads, seeing what new releases were coming out in June. Or maybe it was August. August hasn't happened yet, it's July. It was a month or two ago. My brain hurts. But I was scrolling in the new releases in like science fiction, and I saw this colorful cover, and it had a rabbit on it. And its title was Rabbits. And I was like, ooh, okay. Cover's nice, very colorful. White background, I like it. Very minimalistic, but poppin'. Then I read like the summary. How we might wake up at 4:44 a.m., get into our car, which has 44,444 miles on the odometer. Just a big string of connections, coincidences that we might pass off, or it could mean that we're venturing into a rabbit hole. Rabbits is about a game of the same name, Rabbits. No one knows if that's the official name, but it's what the people playing it refer it as. The way to play Rabbits isn't that clear. You're just supposed to find these like discrepancies in real life or connections, like how someone might be wearing a band t-shirt that's the band is currently playing at the subway you're walking through right now, and you're supposed to follow these things up, and you eventually get to the end and you might win the game of Rabbits. The people who win get these phenomenal prizes like recruitment into the CIA, untold riches and glory. There's been 10 versions of the game so far, but only 9 winners. These 9 winners exist in the circle. One of the most famous players is Hazel. I think they won like the 8th iteration of the game, or almost did, but they're like the guide of Rabbits. But though some people may see this as just a strange, archaic game that a bunch of weirdos play, some people actually believe Rabbits has a more important role in society, maybe existing as the foundation of society itself. The book begins with our protagonist, Kay, the letter K. They are kind of an expert on rabbits. They haven't really played the game themselves, but they're just like that really obnoxious fan in the bleachers who never has played the sport, but somehow knows everything about the sport. That's Kay. So Kay one day when giving like one of their lectures on what is Rabbits, talking to this room full of nerds who are also interested in the game, Kay comes across this billionaire guy. And this billionaire guy, this guy is Alan Scarpio, I believe. I think that's his name. Alan Scarpio is rumored to be one of the past winners of Rabbits. And Mr. Millionaire is like, hey, Kay, I need your help to fix Rabbits. The game is out of whack, and if we don't fix the game, we're all gonna die. Kay is like, okay, I'm interested. But when they try to get together to, save the world, Mr. Millionaire goes missing. So Kay, without any like tools or knowledge, no guidebook really, because again, they haven't really played the game themselves. The world starts to slip out of sync, if you get what I mean. Weird stuff keeps cropping up. Our character Kay, they're starting to get followed by some shady individuals. This oppressive gray feeling, like a static or a fog, just like clings to them. Kay can see shadowy figures out of the corners of their eyes. Just something is going wrong in the world because Rabbits is going wrong. And Kay gets the feeling that if they don't help the game get back to rights, something very bad is going to happen to them. So it's up to Kay to finally throw their hat in the ring and play the dang game. Okay, so that's the summary. But beforehand, when I got this book, I peeped over to Michael Nipp's channel, good friend, hey bro. And to my shock, I realized or learned that Rabbits isn't only a book. It was previously and still is a podcast. I think it has like 10 episodes in it, each of them like an hour long. Now the book Rabbits exists as a standalone. You do not have to listen to the podcast to get into the book, but because I'm a firm believer of doing things in order, I listened to the podcast before I read the book. It was actually the first podcast I really ever listened to. It was interesting. I like the premise and the mystery of the game of Rabbits. The ending, though it took me a while to get, like to understand what the heck just happened, it actually made a lot of sense. I'm like, oh, okay, a little open-ended, but I get it. If I was ranking this like a book, like how many stars out of 5 stars, it would be a 3 because it was pleasurable. The actors were good with like the narrating portions, the exposition, but they were awful when they were like doing the actual dialogue. I remember like getting chills listening to the narration, but when they started talking like people or trying to, I would just cringe. I wish I wrote down some of the lines I heard, especially from Alan Scarpio. the millionaire, because he's in the podcast too. He's trying so hard to be, tough and stuff. And the main girl character in the podcast, Carly, she does this angry voice when she's talking on the phone, but she doesn't emote. She just manages to mumble her words, and that's supposed to be angry, I guess. Also, this is a premise, rabbits. It's a premise shrouded in mystery. And because a lot of it is supposed to be kept purposefully vague, I felt like it really had to just throw out random events to keep viewers, listeners interested in the podcast. So things would happen and you'd forget they'd happen, and then you'd finish the podcast and you'd be like, wait, why did that happen? What was that? Why was that important to the story? Which occurs again in the book form of it. Starting out on the book, the first chapter, because it's supposed to be a standalone, it's literally ripping out in the first chapter, ripping out exposition from the podcast and just pasting it into the first chapter, literally line by line. Also, again, the dialogue. In both the podcast and the book, they would do this thing where they would just keep repeating obvious facts, like, oh, we're currently in the 9th iteration of the game. The 9th iteration? Does that mean the one before this one was the 8th iteration? Yes, 8th. The one before 9th. I know my numbers, over and over again. 8 comes before 9. 8 comes before 9. I get it. Just a lot of repeating facts, which aggravates me. But that first couple chapters in the book sets up everything from the podcast, all the basic facts about basically the realm of rabbits and what all the game entitles. Basically, reading the first chapter of the book is like listening to episode 1 of the podcast. Different characters, though. I gave this book a 2. Hey, look, it's a rabbit. Knowing what I know about this book, that doesn't bode well. I'm probably gonna be erased from existence. The good things about this book is that even though it's very sciencey, it's very easy to read. It's very quick, simple writing style, and because I was reading this in a chunky fantasy book at the same time, I was really grateful for it. This one's really dense, this one's really easy to read. So it's a big concept, but simple writing style. So I appreciated that. That was great. Except for the dialogue. I'm getting to it. That's going to be a sub-complaint under the main complaint about the characters in this book. So the whole premise is winning the game, rabbits. And it's spooky, it's mysterious, it leads our characters into some dangerous situations. That was fine. Fantastic. I'm also pretty sure Slender Man makes an appearance in this book. So cool. And it talks about the Mandela effect, multiple dimensions, multiverse, all the cool science fiction stuff I'm pretty into. I love the whole alternative timelines, different dimensions, different versions of you, doppelgangers. Those are my favorite science fiction tropes. And it talks about that. And again, it takes our characters to some really interesting places. But then it manages to fumble it. So that's all the good things. Easy to read. A good premise, kinda spooky. But then we get into the bad because this is a 2-star. So as mentioned, with a very simple writing style, the characters come across as really simple. It's a first-person narrative. And yeah, we get Kay's backstory and stuff. And I did find the parts leading Kay up to this whole rabbit shenanigan, Kay's past, that whole thing. That was interesting enough. Cool backstory, bro. But what's your personality? I literally got nothing from Kay. I'm you're just a stencil. You're an outline, but there's nothing inside of you. Same thing with the characters. Oh my gosh, there's so many characters in this book. All of them are named. Most of them don't matter. And the ones that are supposed to matter are introduced so late into the game. It's we're suddenly supposed to care for them. I would tell you more about it because the same thing happened in another sci-fi book that I loved, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. It introduced a very important character to our main character in the last 50 pages, and we're supposed to care the world about this character, except they were introduced in the last 50 pages. I don't know you. And in literally both instances, our main characters didn't know them either, because science fiction mumbo jumbo. The characters weren't obnoxious, so that's good. They just weren't impressive. Stencils. There but empty. Also, again, as mentioned in the podcast, how I think it would just throw some cool stuff into the story, just keep people interested in listening. Same thing here, because it's rabbits. It's all about following clues, finding the clues, then getting the next clues to go to the next clues. But in the midst of finding all those clues, this isn't, I'm going to talk about an event that happens, but I'm not going to name anything, so I don't think it's a spoiler. But, okay, no, it's not a spoiler, because a ton of people die in this book, and I'm just going to talk about one death. So one guy that's kind of a teammate, informant kind of guy to our two main characters, Chloe and Kay. They talk They meet up, they part ways, but then Chloe and Kay have to go back to this guy, and they find him like brutally murdered in his bathroom. He's still alive, and he manages to like write a message out. And yeah, thank you, murdered guy, for using your last breath to give us that clue. We wouldn't have solved this mystery otherwise. But I finished the book, and I have no idea who killed this man. It would just throw cool things in and just hope that you don't need an explanation like who killed him, who did this, who did that. Why was that clue important? Also, now that I think about it, the science of the game in this world is called radiance, and it's like ley line kind of things. I can't get into it. It's a bunch of giants junk. That, like, our important character was introduced super late into the game, kind of skimmed over like, oh, this is our magic system, kind of. So you think it'd be explained better? No. And again, you're gonna hear this a lot. Deeper into the book, we actually have a villain in this book. But Mr. Villain is introduced very late into the book, and his like whole backstory thing is just kind of thrown out there like, oh, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing this kind of stuff. Cool backstory, bro. But I don't know who you are. I think this book was just kind of obsessed with making it spooky, and then towards the end, it's like, oh, we gotta like kind of explain why we're doing all this spooky stuff. And then it was just like, let's just throw whatever sticks and just hope that the readers connect with something. I think it's kind of rushed, lazy exposition. And as a major character-driven reader, that bothers me. The ending itself, like the resolution, just ended so flat to me. Remember that very important character I mentioned who was introduced 50 pages left in the book? Well, as soon as we meet her, she lasts like a couple, 20 pages, then immediately, whoosh, gone. Like, thank you for visiting. In the end, I think this book was an interesting read. It just kind of failed in the execution. I think with like magical realism, and this, what they have in common is that they're trying to be so self-important that they're like self-inflating themselves on a lot of bubkiss, hot, empty air stencils. That when you get to the ending, it just kind of deflates on itself because there's no story or characters to keep it, propped up. Just standing here, I'm thinking of like other things that are more spoilery things that were brought in to the book but never answered, and I don't like that. Okay, when you give me a mystery, I want it solved, because if you just leave it open-ended kind of for the sake of vagueness and mystery, then I feel like the author can just like get away with whatever they want because, hey, it's supposed to be vague, and that just gives a book more excuses to have plot holes and stuff like that. So in the end, fun but frustrating. 2 out of 5, read at your own peril. It's not that crazy. It's not that horrible. It's certainly not good, but do with it as you will. I honestly recommend listening to the podcast more. But now that I'm thinking about the podcast, I'm thinking about all the unanswered stuff that doesn't make sense in the podcast. I don't know. You're an adult, probably. Do whatever you want. But until next time, stay reading, my friends.